Evan came home early and caught the maid in an unbelievable act, one twin pulling her forward with a rope, the other holding tight on her back, both moving for the first time in years. Before this moment, the Carrington mansion had known only stillness. For 3 long years, ever since Elena Carrington's death, her twin daughters, Aria and Nova, had lived in a condition doctors called severe developmental paralysis. No injury, no accident, just grief so deep it shut their bodies down. They stopped crawling, stopped standing, stopped lifting their arms, until even their tiny legs became motionless. Therapists came and went. Neurologists examined them endlessly. Machines beeped, scans flashed, but nothing changed. Every expert told Evan the same thing. Prepare for a lifetime of wheelchairs. Movement is impossible. So the house adapted to their stillness. Playmats collected dust. Toys stayed exactly where they were left. And the wheelchairs became part of the scenery. Cold, constant reminders of what was lost. Then came Shanice Porter, a black maid from a working-class background, hired for light cleaning, certainly not for therapy. She had no medical degree, no certification, no fancy title, but she had something more powerful: instinct, presence, patience, and a way of seeing children the world had given up on. She noticed what the doctors didn't: how Aria's eyes tracked movement, how Nova's fingers curled ever so slightly when excited, how both girls leaned toward warm voices, how their bodies weren't broken, just frozen. So Shanice tried something no doctor had considered: a game, a simple rope tied around her waist, one twin pulling with all the strength her little arms could remember, the other twin clinging to her back, giggling for the first time in years. Shanice stood firm, letting them work, letting their bodies wake up through play. And it worked. The floor filled with the sound of effort, little breaths, tiny grunts, soft squeals of determination. Movement, the one thing the twins had forgotten, was returning. And that's the exact moment Evan walked in, expecting silence, but instead finding one daughter dragging the maid by a rope, the other gripping her back, laughing, both moving, alive, awakened while their wheelchairs sat empty behind them. A miracle unfolding right before his eyes, and nothing about their lives, or his, would ever be the same. Again, before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The silence in the mansion was more than quiet. It was hollow. It had weight, like a blanket soaked in grief. Every step echoed as if afraid to disturb what had become sacred stillness. Long halls were lined with portraits of joy that no longer lived here. In the heart of this haunted beauty were 2 porcelain dolls, except they weren't dolls. They were the Billionaire'S daughters, Ava and Aria. It all began the night Elena died. The nanny had been the heartbeat of the home, loving, warm, gentle, until her sudden passing fractured something deep within the household. It was shortly after her funeral that the girls, once lively and babbling, simply stopped. First, they stopped crawling. The toys that once delighted them lay untouched. Then their legs stiffened, not from injury, but refusal. They didn't try. They didn't want to. They became limp when held, rigid when sat down. Days turned into weeks. Every attempt to place them on the floor was met with ear-piercing screams, blood-curdling, as if the ground itself had betrayed them. Doctors were brought in, neurologists, child psychologists, specialists flown in from overseas. Their conclusion: severe developmental freeze, psychosomatic, trauma-induced paralysis paired with emotional regression. It was the kind of diagnosis that made the staff tiptoe around the girls like they were fine china. Caregivers whispered. Nannies passed them back and forth like museum pieces. The twins barely blinked. No crawling, no walking, no laughter, no tears. Time froze in that house. Years passed, but the girls didn't. Not emotionally, not physically. The wheelchairs came next, not out of need, but precaution. If they wouldn't walk, at least they'd be moved safely. Their bedrooms became shrines, their routines, rituals. And then Shanice arrived. A new maid, mid-20s, confident, observant, not broken by the weight of the home. The staff didn't expect much. Maids came and went. But Shanice wasn't just wiping surfaces and folding laundry. She was watching. The twins were always still. But one day, as she dusted near their chairs, she hummed softly, just a tune her grandmother used to sing while sweeping. Barely noticeable. But as she glanced up, she saw it. A finger twitch. Ava's foot had flexed. Gently, as if testing the rhythm. As if something inside her stirred. Not much, but something. Shanice narrowed her eyes. The next morning, she sang aloud while vacuuming. Not for anyone else, just loud enough for it to travel through the silence. Aria's eyes moved. Not randomly, toward her. That evening, Shanice passed the girls and laid her hand gently on Ava's. A warm press. Nothing forced. The girl didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes. Not in fear. In recognition. Something was happening. Something no one else had noticed. Not the therapists. Not the specialists. And certainly not the billionaire, who had long since given up hope. But Shanice felt it. The way their fingers curled slightly to rhythm. How they leaned barely into touch. Like someone reaching out from a cave, too long in darkness. These weren't broken children. They were asleep behind their own eyes. And Shanice, she might just be the alarm clock. Shanice paused outside their door that night, her hand still tingling from Ava's tiny grip. She whispered to herself, what scared them so badly they chose not to live in their own bodies? Then she froze, because in the reflection of the glass cabinet behind her, one of the twins had turned her head, ever so slightly, and she was looking right at Shanice. The rules in the house were simple. Don't lift the girls without assistance. Don't place them on the floor. Don't overstimulate. And above all, don't try to fix what can't be fixed. Shanice read the binder during her first week like everyone else. But by now, she'd stopped pretending it mattered. The twins weren't made of glass. They were made of something much more fragile. Hope. And unlike glass, hope could be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, with patience and maybe a little bit of play. So instead of obeying protocols, Shanice began to experiment. She started with socks. Bright ones, striped ones, some with jingles stitched into the toes. When she slipped them on the girls' feet and gave them a gentle wiggle, she wasn't expecting much, but she was watching closely. Nova flinched, just barely. A twitch, then stillness. Shanice didn't call it out. She simply moved on, like nothing happened. The next day, it was textured toys, spiky balls, soft ribbons, rings with subtle vibrations. She placed them in the twins' laps during their usual long silences. Then she sat near them, talking to herself, laughing at her own stories, and humming under her breath. Aria's fingers shifted. First a flicker, then a roll of the wrist. Shanice's heart skipped, but her face stayed calm. Inside, though, she wanted to scream. They weren't frozen. They were responding, on their own terms, in their own time. The breakthrough came with the foam mats. Thick, soft puzzle pieces she pulled from storage one early morning while everyone else was still asleep. She laid them out in the sunroom, away from the nurses and cameras. Then she returned to the girls' room and whispered gently, "We're going to break a rule, just you and me." She lifted them carefully, one at a time. Nova's arms stiffened. Arya whimpered, but Shanice didn't push. She placed them down slowly, letting the mats take their weight, letting gravity do its work. At first, they lay there like dolls, unmoving, unsure. Then something happened. Nova's toe curled against the foam. A slow press, like testing the floor for the first time in years. Arya's hand fanned open, then clenched into a fist. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Shanice leaned back, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You feel that?" she whispered. "That's yours. You own that movement." She stayed with them there for nearly 20 minutes, talking, playing music from her phone, offering rattles she knew they wouldn't take. Yet, then came the interruption. The sharp voice, the heavy footsteps, the click of expensive shoes across hardwood. "What in God's name are you doing?" Evan, the girl's father, the billionaire, the man who never came home early, the man who hadn't seen his daughters lying outside their wheelchairs in years. Shanice stood up so fast she nearly tripped. Sir, I was just—" "You were violating their care plan," he snapped. His eyes weren't angry. They were terrified. "They're not supposed to be on the floor. If they seize up, if they collapse again." "They're not seizing," Shanice said quietly. "They're trying." He took a step forward, breath tight in his chest. "Pack your things." Then, for the first time, the twins made a sound. Not words, not cries, just a soft hum from Nova, barely audible. But it made Shanice freeze. Evan turned sharply toward the girls. Nova had lifted her head, just slightly, and Arya's hand was reaching, not for her father, for Shanice. Her fingers curled in the air like they knew exactly who they were reaching for. And Evan said nothing. He just stared at his daughters, like he was seeing them for the first time. Shanice didn't move, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. The girls hadn't made a sound in years, let alone reached for anyone. But now they had. And as Evan slowly backed out of the room, he asked a question lingering in both their minds. "Why do they only respond to you?" Shanice had crossed the line, and everyone knew it. The staff whispered in corners now, passing her in hallways with pitying looks. The maid with the foam mats, they said with smirks. "Floor play," they snorted, "like babies need games." But Shanice didn't care, because the girls had responded, and she wasn't about to stop. She didn't treat them like glass. She didn't flinch every time they twitched. She didn't hover, suffocate, or step back. She engaged, and little by little, the girls responded, not with words, not with leaps, but with the first sparks of trust. That morning, she sat across from them on the rug, her legs crossed, eyes soft. "In," she whispered, placing a hand over her chest. "Out." A breath. Then again, slower this time. And out. At first, the twins just watched. Then Nova's chest rose, a second behind Shanice's. Arya followed a beat later. No prompting, no pushing, just mirroring. A foundational milestone. Imitation. Awareness. They weren't copying a therapist. They were copying her. Behind them, Evan stood like a statue, his suit pressed, his tie slightly loosened, his whole being strung tight. He had come to watch, to observe, to maybe understand. Shanice didn't look at him when she spoke. They didn't freeze because they were broken, she said quietly. They froze because the world stopped feeling safe. Evan's jaw clenched. And you think a few toys and breathing lessons will change that? I think safety isn't about toys, Shanice said. She looked at him then. It's about who's on the floor with them. Evan looked at his daughters, his fragile, frozen girls, and saw something unfamiliar in their faces. Attention. Focus. Calm. He sat down slowly on the edge of a chair. What if they try and it doesn't work? What if they fall? What if they break again? Shanice softened her voice. What if they don't try and stay broken forever? He didn't answer. That night, a quiet moment cracked the stillness of the nursery. Shanice stood to leave, her shift ending. She leaned in, kissed Nova's forehead gently, something no one else dared to do, and whispered, "Same time tomorrow, okay?" She reached the door when a small, sharp sound stopped her. Nova was crying, not screaming, not panicking, but a slow, hiccuping sob, a sound pulled from a part of her that had been silent for so long. No one believed it still worked. Evan had come to check on them. He saw it with his own eyes. Nova's tiny hands clenched her blanket. Her cheeks were wet. Her head turned toward the door like she was reaching without reaching. Shanice hesitated, then turned back. "I'll stay." And just like that, Nova stopped. Evan stood in the shadow of the hallway, speechless. Later, as Shanice folded laundry in the corner of the staff quarters, Evan approached her. "You're not afraid to touch them," he said. "You're not afraid to push them." Shanice looked up, calm. "They don't need someone strong," she said. "They need someone safe." He didn't respond at first, just stared at the folded baby socks in her hands. "I couldn't protect them," he finally said. "I tried. I threw money at experts. I made this place quiet, controlled. I thought safety was about eliminating risk." "Safety," Shanice said softly, "is knowing you can fall and someone will catch you." The next morning, Evan stood outside the playroom, watching through the glass. Shanice was already on the mat, laughing softly as the girls responded to her voice. They weren't smiling, but they were present. He placed a hand on the door handle, but didn't go in. Not yet, because the question haunted him, heavier than ever. Was he finally ready to let someone help them in a way he never could? The twins didn't need another lullaby. They needed rhythm. Shanice knew this kind of healing didn't come through soft whispers and silence. It came from reawakening movement that had long gone dormant. And sometimes the body remembered what the mind wanted to forget. So she brought drums. Not actual drums, but the next best thing. Wooden spoons and upside-down bowls, a padded tambourine, even her palms against the foam mat. The girls watched her build a little world of sound and beat on the floor before them. She began with soft, steady tapping. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Pause. Then came the chant. A gentle melody, simple and rhythmic. Step by step, beat by beat. Tiny hands, tiny feet. She tapped her hands on her knees. The repetition wasn't just musical, it was biological. This was sensory play at its core, activating pathways that once fired without thought. At first, nothing. Then Nova's toe flicked. Arya blinked rapidly, fingers twitching against the mat. Shanice kept going, step by step, beat by beat. Arya's knees jerked once, then twice. Her eyes widened, surprised by her own movement. Shanice didn't react. She didn't gasp or clap. She just nodded, like she'd known all along this would happen. Then it happened. With an almost imperceptible grunt, Arya lifted her hips. Only for a second, but she did it. She pushed. Her face scrunched from the effort. Her arms trembled, but it was real. Her body responding in coordination, however brief. Shanice smiled, tears stinging the edges of her eyes. "Good girl," she whispered. "You're still in there." Moments later, Nova did something no one had seen in years. She sat up. No help. No straps. Just a slow, wobbly lean forward, her tiny arms bracing herself. And then she held it. Not long. Just 3 seconds. But she was upright. Alive. Present. Shanice froze, barely breathing. That's when the door opened. Evan stepped inside and saw both girls, on the mat, focused, moving. And then, like it had been rehearsed, both heads turned in perfect unison toward Shanice. Not just a glance. Not a flicker. Full attention. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Shanice like he'd just witnessed a miracle. "Hey, how?" he whispered. Shanice didn't answer right away. She helped Nova lower herself, gently onto the mat, then turned to Evan. "Development didn't die," she said. It paused. She moved to all fours and began crawling slowly, an exaggerated, silly motion. She looked over her shoulder. "Watch." The twins stared. Then, Arya's arm lifted and planted down in mimicry. Nova followed. They didn't move forward, but the motion was there. The intention. The echo of something their bodies used to know. Evan dropped into the chair like he'd been hit. He didn't understand everything, but he could see it clearly. His daughters weren't statues. They were waking up. Not emotionally. Physically. They weren't leaping. They were rebuilding from the first building blocks, the ones everyone thought had vanished with Elena. As Shanice cleaned up the toys and props, Evan stood still by the door, watching the girl's eyes track her movement. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the question was already roaring in both of their minds. Could they truly relearn what grief had once erased? It only took 5 words to undo weeks of quiet progress. "Stop that. You'll hurt yourself." The voice came from a caregiver in the hallway, stern, sharp, unthinking. She'd rounded the corner and seen Arya's arms stretching clumsily on the foam mat, trying to mimic Shanice's crawling again. She hadn't meant harm, but fear made people loud, and loud was dangerous here. The effect was immediate. Arya flinched. Nova's body stiffened. By the time Shanice entered the room, it was already too late. The twins were frozen, eyes wide, muscles locked, shoulders hunched like prey sensing a predator. The gentle flickers of motion from earlier that morning had vanished, like lights switched off. Their hands curled into fists, their heads lowered, and worst of all, their breathing was shallow again, exactly like before. Shanice dropped to her knees in front of them. "Girls, it's okay. You're safe. You're okay." But they didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't see her. The regression wasn't subtle. It was total. Evan arrived hours later after a board meeting, only to be met by cold silence and stiff limbs. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice already tightening. Shanice hesitated, heart pounding. Someone shouted, not at them, but near them. It scared them. Badly. Evan's jaw ticked. "Who?" But before Shanice could answer, Dr. Hale stepped into the room, stern, clinical, smug as ever. "This is exactly what I warned you about." "You warned me they might move again," Evan snapped. "You said it was impossible." "I said it was dangerous to give them hope," Dr. Hale corrected. "They're regressing because they've been overstimulated. Shanice's approach might feel good, but it's not therapy. It's play. And play doesn't heal trauma this deep. Shanice's hands trembled as she folded the edge of the foam mat. If I've hurt them, she said softly, then I shouldn't be here. Evan turned sharply. You're not responsible. They cried, Shanice whispered. Last night, after it happened, I heard them, curled up in their beds, sobbing. Not screaming, not tantrums. Grief. I caused that. I opened something they weren't ready to feel. She placed her badge on the counter. I'll pack my things. Evan didn't stop her. Not then. That night, the mansion fell back into silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't numb. It was morning. At 2 a.m., Evan stood outside the girl's bedroom door listening. And there it was again. The sound no one had heard in years. Crying. Not panic. Not distress. Emotion. Nova's soft hiccups. Aria's gasping sobs. Their bodies couldn't move, but their hearts were speaking loud and clear. He stepped inside, sat between their beds. I don't know what you're feeling, he said, his voice breaking, but I know what she gave you. The girls didn't look at him, but their tears didn't stop, because this wasn't about Shanice being kind. It wasn't about routines or toys or chanting. It was about awakening, and Shanice had sparked it. Evan stared at the empty foam mat in the corner. She hadn't just helped them move. She had made it safe for them to feel again. By sunrise, Evan stood at the kitchen island, phone in hand, Shanice's resignation still untouched. The doctors wanted her gone. The staff doubted her. The science wasn't on her side. But as his daughter slept, tear-stained, but no longer empty, he asked himself, was he willing to defy every expert, to give Shanice the freedom they needed to wake up again? She hadn't expected him to show up at dawn. But there he was, Evan, standing on the servant wing's porch in a tailored suit, shoulders slouched like a man who'd stopped pretending he had all the answers. I need you to stay, he said, voice low. Not the Shanice who follows orders, the one who breaks rules. Shanice blinked, unsure. They cried because of me. They cried, he said, because of what you woke up. You're not hurting them. You're reaching them. And no one else has. He held out a key. Do it your way. All of it. By noon, the empty East Wing had become something new. She called it the developmental room. Foam mats covered the floor in vibrant color. Velvet curtains filtered soft sunlight through wide bay windows. There were textured panels on the wall, soft wool, sandpaper, fake grass, and sensory paths shaped like rivers winding across the floor. From hidden speakers, gentle rhythmic beats pulsed like a heartbeat, subtle and grounding. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like play. She started with the basics, what she'd researched, what she instinctively knew. Infant-level core reactivation. Tummy time on soft mats, where pressure built strength. Gentle wrist rolls. Guided knee bends. Games that didn't feel like therapy, but tricked the body into remembering. Each session started the same. Breathe in, Shanice would say. Breathe out. We're just waking up the muscles. That's all. At first, the girls were hesitant, stiff, withdrawn. But then came the change. Nova giggled first. A snort, unintentional, bubbling out as she slid over a bumpy foam ramp. Shanice's eyes snapped up. Then Aria laughed, a high, musical burst of joy so pure it echoed off the walls like a long-lost song. It wasn't delicate. It was messy, real. Shanice dropped to her knees. That's it. That's you. That's you. The girls weren't just laughing. They were engaging. The laughter made them wiggle. The wiggle turned to small shifts. Shifts turned to roles. Their bodies, locked for so long, were playing, and in doing so, activating muscles they hadn't used in years. Then it happened. Arya planted her palms down, wobbled, and pulled herself forward. A clumsy, 1-inch drag, but she did it again, and again, determined, sweat on her brow, eyes focused. Nova, watching her sister, followed. Not as far, not as smooth, but her elbows bent, and she slid forward behind Arya. Twin turtles on a sun-warmed beach, moving instinctively towards something unseen. Shanice dropped beside them, tears in her throat. "You don't even know what you're doing," she whispered, "but your bodies do. Your legs remember joy, not pain." The girls didn't speak. They didn't need to. They laughed. They moved. They pressed their faces into the textures, exploring them with cheeks, noses, and fingertips. This wasn't forced. It was chosen. Evan watched from the doorway, his face unreadable, but his hands, once always in fists, now hung open at his sides. They weren't just being pulled back to life. They were crawling toward it. As Arya inched her way to the plush mat's edge and Nova rolled into a pile of pillows, Shanice whispered to herself, "This isn't recovery, this is rebirth." But in the quiet that followed, even she had to wonder, was this the moment their bodies chose to return? The room was quiet, almost reverent. Sunlight pooled across the mats like liquid gold. The soft rhythm of the speakers pulsed like a distant heartbeat. In the center of the room, a rope lay stretched between Shanice and the twins, thick, soft, and colored in playful strands of yellow and blue. It wasn't a tether. It was an invitation. Shanice knelt at one end, holding it gently. "You know the game," she said softly, like she'd said it 100 times before. "Just follow the rope." On the other end, the twins sat on their knees, heads tilted like tiny explorers considering a new world. Arya reached out first, brushing the rope with her fingers. Then she grasped it, gently, almost reverently, and she moved. One elbow forward, then the other, then a clumsy push of her knees. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't quick, but it was real. She crawled across the room. Her muscles trembled under her tiny frame, but her face didn't twist in fear. It glowed with effort, with concentration, with will. Nova followed behind her, grabbing the rope like it was a lifeline. Her motion was faster, stronger. She grunted as she moved, pulling herself forward with new urgency, cheeks flushed with determination. They weren't mimicking now. They were choosing. Every inch forward was history rewriting itself. Shanice stayed low, eyes wide, lips trembling with emotion. "You're doing it," she whispered. "You're really doing it." When they reached her, Arya collapsed into her lap, breath heavy, forehead damp with sweat. Nova curled beside her, panting, laughing. That sound again. Laughter. It was their new language. Shanice knelt in front of them and slowly, deliberately rose to her feet. She extended both arms. "Come on," she said. "You've made it this far." The girls looked at each other, then at her. Then, Arya moved first again. She placed her tiny hands against Shanice's legs. She pressed up, wobbling on her knees. Her arms shook, her core strained. Then her feet found the mat, and she stood. Nova watched her sister. Always the shadow, always the echo, but not now. She stood up beside her. Two unsteady girls, clinging to each other, blinking in awe at a height they hadn't felt in years. And then they took a step, wobbly, hesitant, then another. Shanice didn't breathe. The door creaked open. Evan stepped inside, brow furrowed, expecting another quiet moment of crawling, or maybe a giggle from a pillow pile. But what he saw, Arya, Nova, walking. His breath left him in a rush. No, the girls turned to the sound of his voice. They didn't walk toward him. They ran. Not perfectly, not fast, but with momentum only their hearts could fuel. Arms out, faces lit with light, laughing, alive. Evan dropped to his knees the moment they hit him. Two tiny bodies crashing into his chest with full force. He clutched them, his arms wrapping around their backs, as if afraid letting go would break the miracle. "I have my baby's back," he whispered, over and over, the words trembling against their hair. "I have my baby's back." Shanice turned away to wipe her face, her breath catching in her throat. No one in that room would ever forget the sound of those footsteps, because they weren't just steps. They were returning, not from paralysis, not from grief, but from a place so far and dark that even doctors had stopped looking. The mansion no longer whispered. It rang with footsteps, tiny, chaotic ones, running through hallways, dancing across mats, slapping joyfully against hardwood, paired with laughter that ricocheted off marble columns and spilled out open windows into the gardens below. Once, this place had felt like a museum, sacred, frozen, haunted by what was. Now it was alive. Dr. Hale returned one final time, called in not by urgency, but by humility. He stood in the middle of the developmental room, eyes on the twins as they raced down a line of balance blocks, their giggles uncontainable. He said nothing for a long time, then finally, quietly, "We misdiagnosed them." Evan raised an eyebrow. "You said they were locked in trauma." "I thought they were. But this wasn't trauma paralysis. This was something rarer, a complete developmental freeze." He exhaled. "We didn't see it because we weren't looking for life." Shanice said nothing. She didn't need to. The girls were their own evidence now. Later that week, Evan made his decision. The staff who mocked Shanice's floor play. The ones who tiptoed past the twins like ghosts in a tomb. The ones who believed silence was safety. All gone. The house would never again be a shrine to fear. "I won't let anyone lock them in glass again," Evan told Shanice. "Not even me." He handed her a folder, stamped with a gold seal. "I've started something. Something new." The papers inside were blueprints, legal filings, fundraising outlines. At the top, in bold, were the words, "The Elena Foundation for Developmental Reawakening." "It'll be in her name," he said softly, "but it'll be your work." Shanice blinked, stunned. "You want me to run it?" "I want you to lead it," he said. "You didn't just save them. You found something science didn't know how to see." So she stayed, not just in the house, but in their lives. Every morning, the girls crawled into her lap before breakfast. Every afternoon, they ran to her with scraped knees and wide grins. They didn't just love her. They clung to her like a second mother. And Shanice, she no longer felt like just a maid. She was their guide, their safe space, their soft rope across the room. The woman who saw movement where others saw stillness. The one who gave their bodies permission to return. The mansion changed, too. It was repainted, refilled, reimagined. The foam mat stayed, now cleaned daily and proudly placed in the sunroom. The music still played softly in every room. But the silence, gone, replaced by footsteps, by squeals of delight, by daily miracles that no longer surprised anyone. Evan no longer hid in his office. He sat with them, played with them, held them. He became present, not just a provider, a father. And every time the twins ran, crawled, danced, or stumbled, he smiled, because every motion was sacred, not for how far they'd come, but for how close they now felt. The camera pulls back, through the halls, past the family portraits, through the sun-drenched windows. Outside, two little girls race across the grass, one laughing, the other chasing. Shanice waits at the bottom of the garden steps, arms wide. They leap into her. And as their father watches from the balcony above, eyes misted, he finally understands. Their legs never needed strength. They only needed safety.